Happening now, the January 6th Select Committee is ready to reveal what they describe as a mountain of additional evidence after its bombshell primetime hearing packed with chilling testimony and graphic new video of the insurrection. Former President Trump is now firing back after the panel used his daughter's testimony against him. I'll talk to a key member of the Select Committee this hour. Also tonight, record gas prices help push inflation to a 40-year high here in the U.S. President Biden is casting blame at Russia, oil and shipping firms, and Republicans, even as he insists that lowering prices is his top economic priority. And after dodging CNN's questions, the Uvalde school police chief is now speaking out and defending his response to the massacre. He's reportedly denying he prevented officers from breaching the shooting scene and confronting the gunman. We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. Tonight, the January 6th Select Committee is expressing a sense of urgency just ahead of its next public hearing on Monday. Members warning over and over again that democracy remains in danger and that former President Trump is still fanning the flames. CNN congressional correspondent Ryan Nobles is covering the insurrection investigation.
The January 6th Select Committee has begun to make its case that Donald Trump is to blame for what happened on January 6th, using the words of Trump's closest allies, like Attorney General Bill Barr.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit.
And family members.
I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
To lay the groundwork that Trump knew he lost the election, but told his supporters he won anyway. The former president already pushing back, taking to his new social media platform to claim his daughter had, quote, long since checked out and was, in my opinion, only trying to be respectful to Bill Barr. Meanwhile, the committee is forging ahead. The committee planning for 7 public hearings in all. The second scheduled for Monday, the 13th, and the third on Wednesday, with a fourth to be held on Thursday, the 16th. Vice Chair Cheney teasing out the themes each hearing will hit on. She says hearing 2 will show Trump's massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information about the election. The third will focus on how the former president, quote, corruptly planned to replace the attorney general. Then a hearing devoted to what the committee says was Trump's idea to get then Vice President Pence to refuse to count electoral votes for Biden. Trump claiming he never endorsed his supporters chanting "Hang Mike Pence," calling it a, quote, made-up story. After that, testimony that Cheney says describes how Trump corruptly pressured state legislatures to hand him the presidency. And finally, hearing 6 and 7, zeroing in on how Trump summoned a violent mob to the Capitol that led to a deadly riot. All with the aim of convincing the American people of a conspiracy to overturn the election directed by Trump.
It's a pretty simple story of a president who lost, who couldn't stand losing.
Republicans like Congressman Jim Jordan, who was a focus of the investigation, attempting to downplay the committee's work.
This was a partisan production put on by the former head of ABC News. I don't think we learned anything new.
And Committee Chair Benny Thompson telling CNN the committee has a lot more to share.
We have a number of witnesses who come forward that people have not talked to before. That will document a lot of what was going on in the Trump orbit while all of this was occurring.
And the impact of the violence on January 6th still being felt today.
That day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for.
And as the committee continues to make its case, President Biden is endorsing their work and encouraging Americans to pay attention.
It's important the American people understand what truly happened. I tell you what, there's a lot going on.
And among the revelations last night was a claim by Vice Chair Liz Cheney that there were Republican members of Congress that asked the former administration for pardons in advance of the former President Donald Trump leaving office. One of those particular members of Congress that was identified was Representative Scott Perry. Perry taking to Twitter today to push back on that claim. He says the claim that he asked for a pardon or any other member of Congress is actually an absolute shameless and soulless lie. Of course, Wolf, last night the committee said that they have evidence to the contrary. We'll have to see if that evidence is revealed over these next couple of hearings.
Good
Wolf?
point. Ryan Noble's up on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much. Let's discuss what's going on with a former D.C. Metropolitan Police officer who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, Michael Fanone. He's now a CNN law enforcement analyst. Also with us, our special correspondent, Jamie Gangel, and our senior law enforcement analyst, Andrew McCabe, the former FBI deputy director. Jamie, you say the committee underpromised and over-delivered. So how do they build on the case that they laid out last night in these upcoming hearings resuming Monday morning?
I say they over-delivered because I think a lot of people were skeptical that a year and a half later, after everything we had seen, that they would bring something new. And they absolutely did. Not only did we see new testimony, but it was really like a prosecutor laying out a case. And as Ryan just explained, we are now going to see these hearings evolve. And I am told by sources familiar with the committee's investigation that we are going to see striking new testimony, striking new evidence from thousands of documents that they have from both the National Archives, emails, text messages. But I think one of the most effective things they did, showing those depositions, the videotapes of the depositions, it took you behind the scenes.
Yeah, it was really, really a powerful moment when they did that. Andrew, we do know that the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, was watching last night. Do you expect the committee to continue to build what is being described as a roadmap for possible prosecution?
I do, Wolf. And what we saw last night was a classic approach that you see used in organized crime cases. The committee has laid out what we basically refer to as a hub and spoke conspiracy, right? You have a number of different acts. You have, in this case, the president's use of misinformation and around the big lie, his contacting state officials to try to influence them to find more votes, his pressure campaign on Vice President Pence. Each one of those lines or spokes of activity involve different people. The one thing they all have in common is they were all directed by or done at the will of the man in the center, and that man is undeniably President Trump.
That was the case they were laying out last night, and it will continue. Michael Fanone, I want to play this very dramatic, powerful moment from the testimony last night. This is Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards, I assume someone you know, describing what was going on January 6th during the fight that day.
What I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I'd seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, you know, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, you know, they had, I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
Do you believe Americans and Trump enablers, more specifically, need to hear that kind of eyewitness testimony of what happened?
I do. I think it's important to hear from as many officers that were there on the ground that day as possible. You know, the way that the committee opened up this first hearing, I think it was Prosecution 101. It's been, you know, more than a year since January 6, 2021, and it was important to take the American people back to the day of the insurrection and to hear firsthand testimony from an officer who was on the outermost perimeter, who experienced the violence at the outset of that event.
Yeah, it was so moving. It was so powerful to hear her eyewitness account. You know, Jamie, the former President Trump, he put out a statement now reacting to his daughter Ivanka's testimony, accusing her of being, and I'm quoting him now, checked out on election results. What does that tell you?
You know, I'm laughing because it was pretty predictable. So as Ryan mentioned in his piece, Former Attorney General Bill Barr said that the election fraud was, quote, to use his word, bullshit. Then there was a piece of tape with Ivanka Trump saying she respected Bill Barr and accepted, in effect, siding with Barr over her father. That resonated, and the committee knew it would resonate. They know how to push Donald Trump's buttons, and I expect you will see that over and over again throughout the hearings.
I suspect you're absolutely right. Andrew, a former Justice Department official, Richard Donahue, was quoted last night as describing this as an attempt to have the Department of Justice, quote, in his words, meddling in the outcome of a presidential election. How critical will it be to hear from people inside the Justice Department during the Trump administration?
That episode of President Trump trying to replace the acting attorney general and for the purpose of forcing the department to issue a false letter essentially to the election officials in Georgia, that is one of the most serious allegations against the former president. We have got to hear from those witnesses, those men who were inside the Justice Department, who experienced that pressure and who resisted the president's attempt to use the Justice Department as his own personal campaign attack lawyers.
What do you hope, Michael, to see emerge from these very powerful, dramatic hearings?
The truth. The truth about the origins of the violence on January 6th, what role our political leaders and their subordinates played in that violence, and ultimately accountability for the, not just the violence on January 6th, which, I mean, to me, obviously I have a personal vested interest in accountability for that day, but also for the, you know, like Andy just described, the pressure that was placed by the president, by his sycophants on not just the Department of Justice, but all of these other, what are supposed to be independent entities within our government to essentially overturn a free and fair election.
Yeah, let's hope we get that. Thanks very, very much. Appreciate it. Michael Fanone, appreciate it very much. Jamie Gangel, Andrew McCabe. Just ahead, we'll be joined by a key member of the January 6th Select Committee, Representative Zoe Lofgren. She'll take us inside the next blockbuster hearing and the panel's case against Donald Trump. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.
On Culinary Journeys, meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
Three Strands Global Foundation is a nonprofit that has been combating human trafficking for the last 12 years, focused in on three areas: prevention education, prevention through employment, and prevention through engagement. So we have a few initiatives that directly look at the root causes. One is prevention education, so that teachers can identify exploitation and trafficking, as well as be trauma-informed, and students in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade can be educated. When the pandemic hit, our prevention education program, Protect, we had to do a pivot. The kids no longer were in classrooms. Teachers were no longer in classrooms teaching. They had to make adjustments to be able to actually reach the kids online, which meant that they were looking in a different way with different eyes at their students as their students were learning this curriculum. We had to make sure that teachers still could identify any exploitation or abuse that was happening. Our second program is called the Employ Plus Empower program, and this is our prevention through employment. We want to make sure that survivors aren't re-exploited and that they have a sustainable job, that they are financially secure, and that they can thrive. Survivor voices are incredibly important in this movement, and I believe strongly that when we listen to survivors, we actually will create prevention programs and initiatives that do exactly what we need to do to prevent this crime.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front tonight on CNN.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here.
People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly? Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much?
Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
You can hear gunshots every couple minutes. Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
The members of the January 6th Select Committee are promising to show the American people more crucial evidence as they prepare for their next big hearing and continue to build their case against former President Trump. We're joined now by a key member of the panel, Representative Zoe Lofgren. Representative, thank you so much for joining us. As you know, the chairman of your committee, Benny Thompson, says what we saw last night was just, quote, a down payment, his words, a down payment on more to come. How exactly will your select committee build on that case in these upcoming hearings starting Monday morning?
Well, we're going to go methodically through each of the major problem areas with the former president. For example, examining his claims of fraud. You know, that was important because it was false. We know that he was told that it was false, and yet he continued to stir up the American people with false narratives. That's connected to his fundraising, but it's also connected ultimately to his effort to overthrow the election. So we have witnesses. Virtually all the witnesses are from Trump world because they were the ones in a position to see what was going on. We have documentary evidence, and we'll just march through the evidence and the witnesses so people can see what the truth is.
The former Fox News political editor, Chris Steyerwalt, who called the 2020 race in Arizona for Biden, will testify Monday morning. What specifically will he be explaining to the American people?
Well, I don't want to preempt his testimony, but he has insight into the loss and the campaign. He's a data analyst and knows that Trump lost and how he lost. That is also reflected in other information within the Trump campaign. They knew that he lost. The administration knew that he lost. But as soon as he was told the specifics about these allegations being incorrect, they'd been investigated, they'd proven to be just bogus, he would continue and continue to repeat them, to basically confuse and lie to his supporters and the American people.
Republican Congressman Scott Perry says what your committee contended last night, that he actually sought a pardon from former President Trump, in his words, is, quote, a shameless and soulless lie. How do you respond to that?
Well, we will provide the evidence we have in its proper order. I would note, it made me remember the minority leader, Mr. McCarthy, claiming that he had never, ever called for the president to resign. And it was only an hour later that the audio tape where he did the very same thing became public. So the evidence doesn't lie. We'll lay out what we have in the proper order.
Jason Miller, a key Trump aide whose taped interview was featured last night, as a lot of us will remember, says he was taken out of context. We're told the full transcripts will be released at some point. Why not release them now?
Well, that's up to the chairman, but I think obviously his interview went on for a very long time. We didn't play the whole thing. I don't think there was anything at all misleading, but we'll release the all the transcripts in due course, and people can see that there was nothing to this. You know, they have really no answer to what we've outlined here. I mean, this is a very serious assault on the peaceful transfer of power, really an assault on our democratic republic. And I've heard Republican legislators talking about everything else, trying to discredit the effort, but they can't. And I think Liz Cheney said it best. One day, someday, Donald Trump will be gone, but the dishonor that they have brought on themselves will remain.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, we'll look forward to the hearings next week. Thank you very, very much. Coming up, the pain of high prices is only getting worse, especially if you need to fill up your car with gas. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.
コーヒーの持つ力って人と人をつなぐ力だと思ってて、うちの会社のビジョンっていうのは日本のコーヒーといえばフィロコフィアってなることなんですよ。だからそれを達成するには世界に向けた通販が必要だったんですよね。
I'm Sam Abdulaziz in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN. Alex Jones.
Those thought patterns, the three presenters, QAnon group, or the anti-vaxxers, they all originate from Alex.
How much damage can one man do to school shooting victims?
Alex Jones lied about Sandy Hook.
And the country.
The people who listen to him believe the things that he says.
CNN asks those who know him.
He's not like you or me.
Truth doesn't really matter at all.
CNN Special Report, Megaphone for Conspiracy. Alex Jones, Monday on CNN.
Bollywood, a protracted pandemic fractured this more than a century-old industry, sending profits tumbling as in-theatre audiences stayed away. Analysts say India is still watching Bollywood at a record rate. They're simply doing so online.
I think
We've reached significant scale during the pandemic. What we've seen is that the top 30 to 40 million, the premium audiences, they have taken extensively to OTT streaming.
Analysts say India's rapidly growing mobile internet population is behind much of this growth. Here in India, local homegrown players continue to thrive in the market. Streaming giant Z5 claims to have the most offerings in South Asia.
Going digital was on the back of wanting to really connect directly with the consumer.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
President Biden today promised he's doing everything he can to tame inflation and bring down prices for Americans. The president says Russia's to blame, also oil companies and shipping conglomerates, as well as Republicans. Let's bring in our Caitlin Collins. She's covering the president out in Los Angeles right now. Caitlin, the White House is all too aware this issue of inflation could actually make or break the Democrats coming up in the midterms and in a presidential contest down the road.
Yeah, Wolf, it's a big vulnerability for this president and for his party. Of course, you saw him today not even try to sugarcoat these numbers because really there's no sugarcoating to be done, given it was a very unpleasant surprise for the White House that was hoping these numbers were going to moderate at least slightly in May. And of course, instead they accelerated. And when you heard from President Biden today, he didn't try to make any predictions about when inflation is going to start to go down. And instead, he tried to empathize with Americans who are feeling the pain.
I understand Americans are anxious, and they're anxious for good reason.
President Biden staring down a massive political liability.
Make no mistake about it. I understand inflation is a real challenge to American families.
New data shows consumer prices soared last month, sending inflation climbing 8.6% from last year, the highest since 1981. Biden delivering the bad news today after predicting 6 months ago that the inflation crisis had hit its peak.
I think you'll see it change sooner than quicker, than more rapidly than it will take than most people think.
Prices are now higher for everything from food, fuel, rent to used cars, as Biden officials say that taming inflation is their highest priority.
We are open to ideas. Again, some of them require working with Congress. The president is focused on lowering costs for families.
But those same officials say that the bulk of the response will fall to the Federal Reserve, as Friday's numbers only offer more reason for the central bank to continue raising interest rates.
As part of his plan, I know this doesn't sound like a plan, but first and foremost, he respects the independence of the Federal Reserve.
The troubling figures could spell doom for Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections this November, as Biden lashed out at Republicans, shipping conglomerates, Russian President Putin, and oil companies today.
Exxon made more money than God this year.
President having a lot of criticism there, Wolf, as he was commenting on these new numbers today. One number the White House was hoping would go down was when it comes to prices on consumer goods. They thought potentially as they worked out issues with the supply chain, that number would start to change. You saw President Biden speaking at the Port of Los Angeles today during his trip here to the West Coast. Of course, those numbers are still high, just as the rest that we were just talking about, Wolf. And yes, this is going to potentially have a drag on Democrats in the midterm elections. That is the concern that you hear from a lot of President Biden's allies on Capitol Hill, because we are just 5 months away from the midterm elections. And look at this poll that came out this week. You see that President Biden's approval numbers are a lot lower than they were when he first took office, but his weakest point right now is on the economy, where he only gets a 28% approval rating, Wolf. So these are the numbers that the White House is very worried about when it comes to the inflation, because they thought it was going to start going down by now. Of course, you saw officials like the Treasury Secretary to you saying that they got it wrong when they said they thought inflation was just going to be temporary. Obviously, it is still here several months later. So now they're trying to focus on empathizing with Americans, on saying that they understand what they're going through, instead of telling them when it's going to come to an end, Wolf.
Caitlin Collins reporting for us from Los Angeles. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, gas prices are hitting record highs across the country. Nationally, we're on the verge of hitting $5 a gallon. This is nationally for the first time ever. CNN's Jason Carroll is joining us now from a gas station in New Jersey. Jason, gas prices hitting another record with no end in sight right now. How bad could it actually get?
Well, the reality is it's probably going to get a lot worse, Wolf, before it gets better. That, according to analysts. You look where we are right here in New Jersey. The price is $4.99 for unleaded, the average. That pretty much mirrors the national average, but the street here, the rest of the state and people coming by here, $5.49 at one gas station across the street over there, $5.19. That's the average price for regular gas here. But it's not alone here what's happening in New Jersey. You look across the country, there are more than states, Wolf, that are looking at gas prices $5 over. Look at the state of California topping that list at $6.42. Nevada, $5.62, followed by Illinois, Alaska, and Michigan rounding out the top 10, $5.21. Again, New Jersey here still seeing high prices, 21 cents here more for gas than it was just last week. The average price here now out $5. I was speaking to one driver just a short while ago, Wolf, and you know what he told me? He said it now costs him $50 more each time he has to fill up his tank. Yeah. Another driver told me, she said, every time I go out to the gas station, I'm hoping the prices are going to go down, and they just keep going up. Spoke to one analyst who tells me by the end of the summer, the average cost for gas could be $6. Wolf?
It's pretty alarming. All right, Jason Carroll, thank you very much. Just ahead, the Uvalde school police chief explains his actions for the first time, pushing back at widespread criticism of his response to the massacre.
All new African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. Meet the photographers who are capturing stories on equality and social justice.
I felt that it was my responsibility to document our realities.
African Voices Changemakers, this weekend on CNN, in association with Glow.
In a leafy corner of Bawal National Park, a high-stakes courtship is taking place. The future of this critically endangered species in Bangladesh depends on it. The Asian giant tortoise was thought to be extinct in the country until 10 years ago, when a few were discovered in the wild. And now, conservation biologist Shawar Siza Rahman is on a mission to bring them back.
We realize if we want to prevent extinction of the species from Bangladesh, we must take drastic efforts.
Rahman runs a conservation and breeding center for 4 critically endangered species of turtle and tortoise.
The captive bred critically endangered Asian giant tortoises, which are bred here in our center for the first time in Bangladesh. We'll be releasing these individuals back in the wild.
Working with the indigenous Merle community, he and his team train former hunters as parabiologists, or citizen scientists that collect data and monitor species to help protect local wildlife.
We're empowering them to be the guardian of the ecosystem. I do believe there are reasons to be optimistic, and it all depends on us and the future generation to make that decision and to take action.
The world is changing, the industry's changing, the windows are changing, things going to streaming are changing. And I think if you're a company that just sits around and says, I'm going to do things the same way I've done them for the past 20 years, you're going to be left in the dust. So IMAX has been looking to move into other areas. We did a live stream with Kanye and Drake, and that was really successful. People dancing in the theaters. We also, in a related way, did a deal with Disney Plus, where we're now on that service.
We have front row seats.
And for a number of the big Marvel titles, you could see them with IMAX aspect ratio. So the core movie business is doing extremely well. I think we have to lead the way to a transition to the new world and look at new ways of doing things.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here, changing
fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
Tonight, after more than 2 weeks of dodging questions, the Uvalde School Police Chief is speaking out about his response to the massacre, contradicting accounts of what he did and didn't do. CNN's Omar Jimenez is working the story for us in Texas.
2 weeks after the shooting that killed 19 students and 2 teachers, Uvalde School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo explains his actions for the first time in an interview with the Texas Tribune. Arredondo said he never issued instructions to wait to breach the building and that he didn't consider himself the incident commander, despite earlier law enforcement information saying he was in charge. The chief telling the Texas Tribune he assumed that some other officer or official had taken control of the larger response. The chief also revealing he intentionally left his police radios behind so they wouldn't slow him down or give his location away.
They shot a kid.
And without those radios, the chief said he wasn't aware of the desperate 911 calls for help coming from children inside the classrooms. Chief Arredondo telling the Texas Tribune he called for tactical gear, a sniper, and keys to get inside, holding back from the doors for 40 minutes to avoid provoking sprays of gunfire. According to the interview, he also said officers couldn't enter the steel-reinforced door without a key, and he tried dozens of keys before finding the right one. Each time I tried a key, I was just praying, an agonizing wait for the parents outside the school. 77 minutes after the shooting began and over an hour after Chief Arredondo arrived on the scene, officers were finally able to unlock the door and kill the gunman. A separate report from the New York Times referencing transcripts of body camera footage quotes a law enforcement officer heard saying, "People are going to ask why we're taking so long." Some parents of the victims are criticizing law enforcement's delay.
They're worried about bringing themselves home to their house safe and sound. They just made the wrong choices. They're worried about the wrong things.
Arredondo told the Texas Tribune his priorities that day were to get there as fast as possible, eliminate any threats, and protect the students and staff. Today was the funeral for teacher Eva Mireles. 10-year-old Gilberto Mata was her student and witnessed her killing, along with his other teacher, Irma Garcia, and many of his friends. His parents say he's never going to be the same.
He don't like big crowds no more. He used to be like, let's go do this, go do this. He's gonna have to face his fears because he's never gonna put it behind him.
And his parents say he's just not the same kid he was before this shooting, and that he even visited these memorial sites and saw his 2 teachers, his classmates looking right back at him, and his classmates included his best friend, who he saw get shot in front of him. Wolf.
So heartbreaking indeed. Omar Jimenez, thanks for that report. Let's discuss this and more with our senior law enforcement analyst, Charles Ramsey, the former Philadelphia Police Commissioner, also the D.C. Police Chief. Does it make any sense to you, Chief, that more than 2 weeks later, Chief Arredondo would claim he wasn't the incident commander on the scene? Who was in charge there?
No, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, he's the ranking officer, and the reality is when you show up on the scene as a ranking officer, people look to you. Now, if there was a tactical commander who is better suited to handle a case like that, then you know who that person is, you let that person run it. But to say you assume somebody else was there is just not acceptable. You're the ranking officer, guess what? You got it. And you make the decisions, you make the calls.
Do you buy this explanation that officers couldn't breach the door of the classroom because of a steel jam, and that they were sorting through a set of keys from the janitor.
Well, I haven't seen the door, so I don't know how it could have been reinforced, but it's a school door, so I don't know how much reinforcement it would have. Did it have a window? Is it a solid door? What have you? But I can tell you this. Over my career, and I worked narcotics for a lot of years, I have literally been part of breaching hundreds and hundreds of doors. And there are tools available that you can do that. They may not have had it as far as the police department goes, but the fire department certainly has all kinds of tools available because they have to breach doors to get in to rescue people if there's a fire or something. So I don't buy that. 70 minutes is way too long to wait. I mean, if it was a 5-minute delay or what have you, stuff about not having a radio, you didn't need a radio to know you've got wounded people inside that classroom. And if they're wounded, they're bleeding. And every minute, every second counts when it comes to trying to get people the kind of medical attention they need to have. And so, you know, you have to do what you have to do. It's risky, but they have better equipment and they're in a better position than those kids were and those teachers were because they had absolutely nothing to protect them.
Charles Ramsey, thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, CNN reports from the front lines in eastern Ukraine as fighting right now intensifies.
Africa Avant-Garde in association with Access Bank. More than banking.
We need to start developing more writers. As a producer, I'm always on the lookout for new voices, new writers, because those are the foundations of good storytelling.
The best advice I've ever received is to never stop writing, because once you start practicing the thing that you want to get good at, you start having all those inflicting thoughts of, am I good enough?
To find your voice as a filmmaker or to tell stories that have deep impact, they have to be stories that affect you yourself. If it doesn't affect you, you can't translate that into a story. Whatever you write will be superficial. So first, if you're going to tell a story that is honest, it has to be honest to you first.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
He's interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smirconish today on CNN.
We share this place, we all belong.
In Ukraine tonight, President Volodymyr Zelensky says his forces are holding on to frontline cities in the east amid intense fighting with the Russians. CNN's senior international correspondent Ben Wiedemann traveled to one of those key cities in the war zone.
The daily bread has arrived, 2 loaves per person in the frontline city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. There's no gas here. The bakeries don't work, so the loaves, 10,000, are trucked 10 hours here every day. Lilia has come with her 2 grandchildren and says she tries to shield them from the sounds of war. We tell them there are some guys playing with tanks, she says. How can I damage their mental health? You shouldn't do that. It's impossible. That's the roar of outgoing Ukrainian fire. Tetiana is a volunteer helping hand out the bread. Leaving Bakhmut is out of the question. I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, she tells me. I love them all. I want all of us to live here. It's our land. Everything will be fine. God protects us. Pavlo Dyachenko's job is to investigate every strike, every damaged building for the Bakhmut police.
Airstrike in any time, in the morning, in the evening. We don't know when it's going. People have a damage.
He takes us to a school struck by Russian warplanes Wednesday. 2 passers-by were injured. Classes haven't been held for months. Not far away, a complex of agricultural warehouses has been hit. Workers salvage what they can. Shrapnel tore into the roof of one warehouse containing a precious resource.
We don't know the motives of the Russians for hitting this facility. It's been struck 3 times, most recently on Thursday morning. But one cannot but wonder if all of this Ukrainian grain is the target.
Lyudmila and her 2 children have been staying at this city-run dormitory since March. They fled the shelling on her nearby town. She's pondered leaving to a safer part of the country, but doesn't have enough money, and in the end asks, what's the point? The Russians are coming. It's the same everywhere, she says. When they, the Russians she means, are done here, they'll go further. Yet others aren't so fatalistic, reminded as they wait for the bus out of the city why they should go. Igor, a beekeeper in peacetime, is leaving with his cat, Simon Simyonich. I left everything here, he says, my bees and my house with all my belongings. They load their bags on the bus and go. And the head of Ukrainian intelligence has told The Guardian that they believe that Russia can keep the war up at this pace for another year. He pointed out that for every 1 piece of artillery Ukraine has, Russia has somewhere between 10 and 15. And we've heard many times from President Zelensky and others that at the moment there are about 100 Ukrainian soldiers being killed every day, 500 being wounded. Wolf?
Ben Wiedemann and Krematorsk for us. Thank you, Ben, very much. Let's bring in the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired Admiral James Stavridis. He's the author of the brand new, very important book entitled To Risk It All, 9 Conflicts and the Crucible of Decision. Admiral Stavridis, thank you so much for joining us. There's this top Ukrainian military intelligence official who now says this is an artillery war, and we are losing in terms of artillery. That's a direct quote. How did it get to that point after all the U.S. and other allied assistance to the Ukrainians?
The key here, Wolf, is quite simple. We need to be listening to what our Ukrainian allies, partners are saying, and providing them what they need. And I hear loud and clear the signal, get more artillery to the front. I will add to that, what we need is those longer range surface-to-surface missiles, the so-called American HIMARS. There are other variants of this. which can reach beyond that almost static artillery front line and get back at the Russian logistics, cut off their ammunition. That's the strategy we need to pursue. The administration is moving those HIMARS. Our British allies, other NATO countries are moving those. It needs to be a two-pronged effort to support this tactical need in front of the artillery piece, and then the surface-to-surface longer-range missiles. I think both of those are happening. I think we're going to get there in time.
Ukraine now says they believe Russia can continue to fight for another year. Another year. In your new book, To Risk It All, you tell the stories of fighters forced to make very tough decisions under extreme stress. How does Ukraine prepare for this long haul? Another year, maybe?
You know, in the book, To Risk It All, the opening chapter is about a naval figure, John Paul Jones, who fights in the Revolutionary War, and he stands and delivers for his nation exactly as President Zelensky has done, as Prime Minister Churchill did in the Second World War. That fighting spirit will count for a great deal, Wolf. And also, we need to be helping. We need to be getting our weapon systems in their hands. And third and finally, Wolf, Putin may feel he can go on and on and on, but his burn rate is high. He's losing thousands killed in action. His tanks are being decimated. His equipment is falling apart, and his financial resources, because war is hell, as Sherman said, it's also expensive. Personally, I don't think Vladimir Putin has it in the tank to go a full year here. We ought to give the Ukrainians what they need to drive the Russians out and to the negotiating table.
Retired Admiral James Stavridis, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks also for writing this important new book. We really appreciate it. Up next, the United States just lifting a significant COVID testing mandate. Stand by. We'll be right back.
On Culinary Journeys, meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
I'm Marlene Oberheide and I am a lead solutions engineer at OneTrust ESG. What's really great about leaders coming together at events like this is that you can really have that conversation amongst peers. You can learn from each other's expertise. And at the end of the day, sustainability, to me at least, shouldn't be a competition between companies. It is about collaborating. It is about working together to be more sustainable, to reduce our carbon footprint, to achieve the targets that we need to achieve as society at large. And therefore, having events like this, having this exchange, having discussions, and learning most of all is